Hello, my buddy. Welcome back to English with Luna. I'm really happy you're here today. Whether you're listening in the morning with your coffee, on your way to work, or maybe at night when everything is quiet, I'm glad you chose to practice your English with me. Today, we're going to talk about something very real, something that almost every English learner experiences, especially at A1 or A2 level. How to keep a conversation going in English. Because let's be honest, many of you can answer questions. If someone asks, "Where are you from?" you can answer. If someone asks, "What do you do?" you can answer. If someone asks, "Do you like music?" you can answer. That's not the problem. The problem comes after that first answer. You say your sentence, and then your mind goes quiet. You start thinking, should I say more? What do I say now? Is it my turn to ask something? Am I supposed to continue? And that small moment of silence suddenly feels very big. And here's the important thing. That silence doesn't mean your English is bad. It doesn't mean you don't have vocabulary. It doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It simply means no one has shown you how conversations actually move. Because conversations are not just questions and answers. They are reactions. They are small comments. They are curiosity. They are simple follow-up ideas. And most learners are waiting for the next question instead of creating the next moment. That's what we're going to work on today. Not perfect grammar, not complex structures, not advanced vocabulary. We're going to focus on rhythm, on flow, on how to stay inside the conversation without pressure. Because fluency is not about speaking fast, it's about feeling comfortable staying in the interaction. So if you've ever felt that uncomfortable pause, if you've ever finished your sentence and thought, okay, now what? Stay with me. Today, we're going to make conversations feel lighter, more natural, and much easier to continue.
So let's go a little deeper into this idea of keeping a conversation going, because most learners think the problem is vocabulary, but when you really observe yourself speaking, you notice something different is happening. The moment you finish your sentence, your brain shifts into evaluation mode. You start thinking about whether what you said was correct, whether your pronunciation was clear, whether the other person understood you. And while you're doing all that inside your head, the conversation is still moving outside of you. That internal analysis is what interrupts your natural rhythm. What usually happens is this. Someone asks you something simple, you answer. The answer is fine, it's understandable, but you treat that answer like the final product, like the conversation task is complete. And conversations don't work like tasks, they work like energy exchange. When you stop the energy, even for a few seconds, it feels heavier than it actually is. Think about how conversations happen in your native language. When someone asks you what you did on the weekend, you don't just say one sentence and stop. You expand a little without thinking about it. You add context, you add emotion, you add a small opinion, and sometimes you even change direction slightly. You might start with what you did, but then you move into how you felt about it, or who you were with, or why you decided to do that. That expansion feels automatic in your own language because you are not monitoring yourself. In English, at A1 or A2 level, you are still monitoring constantly, and monitoring creates tension. Tension creates short answers create silence. The real shift you need to make is not linguistic, it's psychological. Instead of asking yourself, was that correct? You begin asking, what else can I share? That small change moves you from defense mode to contribution mode. You stop protecting your English and start using it. A conversation continues when there is something for the other person to react to, and that something doesn't have to be complex. It can be a feeling, it can be a reason, it can be a contrast, it can be a simple detail that opens another small door. When you only provide the minimum required answer, you unintentionally signal that your participation is finished. When you extend your idea just slightly, you signal that you are still engaged. And here is something that many learners don't realize. Native speakers don't continue conversations because they are brilliant. They continue because they are comfortable adding small, imperfect pieces of information. They don't wait to form the perfect sentence. They build the conversation in real time. They add, adjust, correct themselves if necessary, and move forward. The movement is what keeps everything alive. If you treat each sentence like a final exam, you will speak less. If you treat each sentence like a starting point, you will naturally speak more. Keeping a conversation going is not about speaking for a long time. It's about extending the moment just a little longer than feels comfortable. It's about resisting the instinct to stop immediately after answering. It's about allowing yourself to exist in the interaction without rushing to escape it. When you start thinking this way, something changes. You begin to see that conversations are not made of big paragraphs. They are made of small bridges, one small bridge after another. A comment, a reaction, a short explanation, a curiosity. And when you allow yourself to build those bridges slowly, your English starts to feel more stable. So instead of worrying about how to sound fluent, focus on staying present one sentence longer than you usually would. That extra sentence is where growth begins, not in perfection, not in advanced vocabulary, but in the willingness to continue. Now, once you understand that conversations are about contribution instead of perfection, the next step becomes much more practical, but still very human. Because knowing that you need to continue is one thing. Actually doing it, especially when you feel nervous, is something completely different. What often blocks learners at this level is not lack of language, but lack of mental space. When you're speaking English, a part of your brain is still translating, checking, adjusting. That takes energy. So when the other person finishes speaking, you sometimes feel like you need a second to reorganize yourself. And that second feels dangerous. It feels like if you don't fill it immediately, the moment will disappear. But conversations don't collapse that easily. One of the most powerful things you can start doing is shifting your attention away from yourself and toward the other person. When you focus too much on how you sound, you shrink. When you focus on what the other person is saying, you expand. Curiosity naturally generates language. Self-judgment shuts it down. So instead of thinking, what should I say that sounds good, try thinking, what is interesting about what they just said? Even something small, even something ordinary. If someone tells you they had a busy week, there are many directions you can go. You can wonder why it was busy. You can relate it to your own week. You can comment on how you feel when you're busy. You can ask if they prefer being busy or relaxed. None of these require advanced grammar. What they require is attention, and attention creates continuation. Another shift that helps at A1, A2 level is allowing yourself to speak in layers instead of full, perfect blocks. Many learners wait until the whole sentence is formed perfectly in their head before they begin speaking, but that creates delay and pressure. Instead, you can start with the part you know clearly and let the rest build as you speak. Even if you need to adjust halfway through, that's fine. Real conversations are built in real time. They are not written essays. There's also something important about ownership. When you only answer questions, you are reacting to the conversation. When you add a thought of your own, you begin shaping it. That can be as simple as sharing a small opinion or adding a brief personal connection. When you do that, the dynamic changes. You are no longer just responding, you are participating. And participation builds confidence much faster than passive correctness. You might still hesitate. That's normal. But hesitation is not failure, it's processing. The goal is not to eliminate hesitation completely. The goal is to keep moving even when it appears. When you stay in the interaction despite small pauses or imperfect sentences, your brain slowly learns that speaking English is not dangerous, and that lesson is more important than any vocabulary list. Over time, you'll notice something subtle. The more you allow conversations to unfold naturally, the less you feel the need to control them. You stop trying to predict every sentence before it happens. You trust that you can respond in the moment, and that trust is what creates the feeling of fluency, not speed, not complexity. Trust. Trust that you can continue. Trust that simple English is enough. Trust that conversations are flexible and forgiving. When that trust grows, conversations stop feeling like performances and start feeling like interactions, and that's when you truly begin to speak. There is something very important we haven't talked about yet, and it's probably the most uncomfortable part of speaking in another language: the silence. Not the long, dramatic silence, just the small one. The 2 or 3 seconds where nobody speaks. The moment where you can feel your heart beating a little faster because you think, now it's my turn. Silence in your native language feels neutral. Silence in English can feel threatening. And that reaction is emotional, not linguistic. When you feel that small pause, your brain interprets it as danger. It thinks the conversation is failing. It thinks you are failing. And that interpretation creates urgency. You rush. You grab the first sentence that appears in your mind. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But either way, you're operating from pressure. What if the silence is not a problem? What if it's just part of the rhythm? Conversations breathe. They expand and contract. There are moments of energy and moments of reflection. If you observe native speakers carefully, you'll notice they pause more than you think. They search for words. They change direction mid-sentence. They correct themselves without apologizing. They allow the interaction to unfold instead of forcing it forward. But learners often feel responsible for keeping everything alive at all times. That responsibility creates tension, and tension shortens your answers. It makes you want to escape the interaction instead of staying inside it. Part of becoming more comfortable in conversations is changing your relationship with that pause. Instead of seeing it as an emergency, you begin to see it as thinking space. Instead of rushing to fill it, you allow yourself one calm breath. That breath is enough to reset your nervous system, and when your body relaxes, your mind works better. There's also another layer to this: fear of judgment. Many A1, A2 learners are not afraid of speaking, they're afraid of sounding limited. They're afraid that their English will reveal that they are still learning, and because of that, they prefer to say less rather than risk exposing that limitation. But the truth is simple. English is not embarrassing. Silence caused by fear feels heavier than simple sentences ever will. If you say something basic but clear, communication continues. If you say nothing because you are afraid, the conversation stops, and stopping feels worse than speaking simply. Confidence at this stage does not come from suddenly having advanced vocabulary. It comes from tolerating small imperfections without shrinking. It comes from staying in the conversation even when you feel slightly uncomfortable. And discomfort is not a sign that you're failing, it's a sign that you're stretching. The more you stay present during those moments, the pauses, the searching, the slight awkwardness, the more your brain learns that nothing bad happens. You survive. The other person waits. The conversation continues. Slowly, the emotional intensity decreases. Over time, those silences stop feeling like threats and start feeling normal. You begin to trust that conversations don't collapse because of a few seconds of quiet. You realize that you don't need to control every second. You only need to remain available. And that availability is powerful, because when you stop fighting the silence, you gain space to think. When you gain space to think, your sentences become clearer. And when your sentences become clearer, your confidence grows naturally. Not forced, not artificial, just steady. So as we finish today, I want you to carry something simple with you. The next time you're in a conversation in English, don't try to change everything at once. Don't try to suddenly become more fluent. Don't try to impress anyone. Just notice the moment when you usually stop and stay there a little longer. When you finish your first answer, instead of closing the door, leave it slightly open. Add one small detail. Share one small thought. Ask one gentle follow-up. Nothing dramatic, nothing complicated, just enough to keep the interaction breathing. And if there's a pause, let it exist for a second without interpreting it as failure. Silence is not the end of a conversation. Sometimes it's just a transition. Give yourself permission to think. You're allowed to take space. The more you practice this, the more something subtle begins to change. Conversations stop feeling like tests. They start feeling like exchanges. You stop measuring every sentence and start paying attention to the person in front of you. And when your attention shifts outward instead of inward, your English flows more naturally. You don't need to be perfect to connect with someone. You need to be present. And presence is something you can practice every day, even with simple vocabulary, even with short sentences. So this week, focus on continuation. Focus on staying. Focus on contributing one step more than you normally would. That's where growth happens. Quietly, steadily, without pressure. And remember, speaking English is not about proving your level. It's about using what you already know and trusting that it's enough for this moment. Thank you for being here. Thank you for practicing in a way that builds confidence slowly instead of forcing it. Keep showing up, keep speaking, keep allowing yourself to grow naturally. I'll talk to you in the next episode.